Hey, Sally, how are you?
Hello, good morning. I'm doing very well, and how are you?
I'm doing great. Well, thanks for being here. I'm glad we're able to connect. I know we had to postpone, and I'm glad we're able to do this today. But welcome to the Ozark Mountain Publishing author series, and today's your turn. We'll be talking about your book called Life of a Military Psychologist. And as always, I would like you to start out a little bit with your background information and what led up to this book, and then we'll take it from there.
All right, great. Well, as you said, the title of the book, and then I want to make very clear that this is fiction. This is not a memoir. This is a fictional novel. And so it's true, I have extensive experience working with the military in a variety of ways, in counseling and working with intimate partner violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, general counseling, and those type of things. And so this book really is an amalgamation of characters, nothing specifically identifiable to one person. And it is really about the spirit, it is about the journey, a human story, a woman's story of moving through that and finding her voice, or as anyone would, with the intention of living a life that's authentic, that's on a spiritual journey, if you will. So, getting in touch with the strength. And as I could ask you, even, have you ever wanted more? Have you ever been in a situation, could be a living situation, a professional situation, where you have an aha moment and where the work that you're doing is affecting you and your life and your family? And so you really are set about that existential reflection of, do my actions define who I am right now and who I want to be? And so, really, that is what brought forward this book. And in addition to that, in 2009, there was an incident at Fort Hood, Texas. And it was a psychiatrist in the field of military mental health that walked into a readiness deployment center and took the lives of many people there. And so at the time, those of us that were in service in mental health really wondered, is this the consequence of what they call compassion fatigue, or being affected to such a degree by so much trauma, secondary trauma, that this person really lost sight of their life and the violence occurred? Or was this person someone of a nefarious nature, and was that totally separate from who he was and the work he did? And so at the time, it was a great deal of discussion about that. And that's one of the impetus for the book, really, is to ask ourselves, where are we right now? What's going on around us, and what's the life we want to live? So, in those aspects, that's really both the work I did as well as the situational awareness that influenced the writing of the book. And within this book, there are so many different experiences. There's the actual treatment of domestic violence for violent men's offenders. It's fascinating because no one's really seen that before and portrayed in a book as realistic and gritty and such. And there are other situations that are going on. There's a romance, there's sort of espionage going on. And so all of these things lend to a very real story of human drama that is sort of I've been told, a page turner that leads us to a conclusion that we might not have seen coming. And it also speaks to the legacies all of us carry with us, where we come from, the families we grow up in, the stories that, particularly how intimate partner violence shows up in different families along the line. And that part is very interesting and thought provoking and emotional in that sense. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. So, when you were writing this book, were you then drawing just a lot from your expertise and over the years of the experiences you've had to basically then create these scenarios in the book that makes this such a riveting story, or were they just actual specific incidences that you know of and kind of anonymously made their way into the book?
You know, anonymity is really important because there was no specific person, a case. I would never do that. However, what you say is a very good point, is because the experiences talked about are things that, of course, have happened in real life. And the coming away from it, one example is this, is that there's a program called the Lioness, the female engagement team within the Marine Corps. And those are women that would go over and where Iraq or Afghanistan. And although women were not featured in combat, they would be placed in villages and both provided education and support for women, but also its security checkpoints where, because of burqas and such, the males could not at all even suggest looking and asking them whether they were carrying anything under the burqa, those kinds of things. So the women were very much involved in this and risked their lives, both in the sense of providing support, education, these kinds of things, as well as the security checkpoints as well. And people really weren't aware of that. I think there's more of an awareness now, but even still, that the danger, the commitment, the strength, those are things that shine through in this book as well. And the human stories of this. That's why, in terms of his love lost, love found, dedication, these are things that strive, but also the spiritual awareness, because I think it's important for each of us, upon reflection, to understand where we are with that, what we think we deserve. And so if we're in a situation where we're working or in our personal lives where it's untenable, where we feel as though it's not working for us, that we have the wherewithal to understand it and to move beyond it, to get the help we need. And those are all central parts of the book. One of the other, there's a lot of humor in it as well, because one of the other aspects, especially in the area of domestic violence treatment, is that people are aware to some degree that people have group experiences, but they don't know the day-to-day, the idea of addressing, denying, minimizing, and blaming. Those are three tenets of that. And if you've ever known anyone in your life, not even in the violence sense, but denying, I didn't do that, blaming, it was her fault, it was his fault, they made me do it. And it was really interesting because if you can move beyond that, and I've seen people come in and have a great deal of difficulty, but then once they take responsibility, it opens up their lives, you know? So that is an essence within the book, not a particular story. And then post-traumatic stress disorder is also featured in the book, and how that affects lives around the person in their work and such. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of both quality information, realistic, true to life situations, and then again, that piece of coming back, finding your voice. Because I think for so many people, they feel like they haven't been able to do that for a variety of reasons, whether it's culturally, whether it's in a work structure that they found themselves in. And when we do find that, and I've seen that happen, I am a great encourager of that, magical things happen, amazing things happen. So I do believe people can change and grow and move beyond whatever it is that they've lived through, especially certain scenarios in the book that you see that are quite meaningful.
And so, well, good thing is, because you said it's fiction, it could be just a book that someone could read for their entertainment purposes, or others that actually, subconsciously might want some help and, feel drawn to this book to want to read it and see what they might get from it. But what I wanted to ask you about, so can you maybe outline just a little bit of the premise of the main character?
Well, the protagonist, the main character, is a female, and she's a psychologist that works at this very large military base. And so she's hired, in essence, to do general counseling, like she had always done, but she very quickly is absorbed into the world. They call it family advocacy, which does talk about that, and assigned cases. But in addition to that, doing what they call briefs around the base. So for instance, if there is a mishap, say with a group of helicopters, and the mishap means a tragic accident, then called upon to both encourage, in the same breath almost, encourage those to move beyond and to accept it, and also to help them grieve, to help them go through that. So really the life of a military psychologist is about this experience of this woman, of her family that's affected by that, of the love in her life. And it shows how military relationships, and again, there's some really funny moments in it too, because life presents that, doesn't it? Even in the most tragic of circumstances, dark humor or such, we find humor. That's one of the things that keeps people going, right? In the medical profession or other situations. So there is a great deal of humor in that. As she moves through that, offering briefs, offering the group treatment, you get to know the people in the group. And the characters in the group, much like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or different other characters in movies like The Waitress, Medea's Family Reunion. I think Tyler Perry does an amazing job of both using humor as well as dealing with human tragedy. Don't you think so?
I've only heard. I've never seen any of the series, but because I think
Ah,
there's like 10 of them, 20 of them out there, but there's definitely
yeah,
no shortage for people to watch.
yeah. And because he uses absurdity as well as the depth of the most human condition. So I think that's really what I mean as far as that goes. But then it talks about how people deal with it. And that's all of us deal with things. You and I have talked a little bit offline, and it's where we all come from. You know, I was in France and came to America when I was little, and came over on a ship actually. And so that and it shapes the way we see the world, so that each of us brings in to the situation, wherever we find ourselves. And then as we bump up against certain obstacles, certain challenges, if we're able to really have strength within ourselves, to have guidance, which means something different for each person, then we can move through it. We can grow from it rather than shut down, get upset, or lash out. So I think that this really comes into question when you're reading this book. And it really makes you reflect upon where you are, where you're going, and what you choose for yourself. Because if we blame other people for our circumstances as we move through life, we don't necessarily get where we want to go. And as we take responsibility, we know we're able to do it because we move out of that situation and into an intentional, real longing for something more. Have you ever wanted something more?
Of course, I don't think there hasn't been a human on the planet that didn't.
Well, I think that that's great that you see it that way. But sometimes, because I've had this conversation with many people, is they will say, no, I don't. I'm happy where I am. I don't want to push out, and I don't want something more. I'm good where I am. And so that's okay. That's their choice. But it also keeps them in the space where they are. And perhaps later on, they do find that they want something more. But if you have that inkling, even for a moment, even if it passes through your mind, that's the impetus for making changes in your life, you know?
Well, it seems like it's like a double combo. It's first take responsibility, and then have a goal in a way.
Yeah. Well,
I
you know
mean,
what they say, some of the more contemporary writers or executives and such say lean into it. Have you ever heard that expression?
yes, yes.
Because I think that for many people, that can be just a daunting experience, whether it is financial or philosophical. But if you lean into something, if you pick one thing, you lean into it and you do a little at a time, it will still continue to encourage you, and it'll also get you where you want to go. I think it's possible, you know, and I do believe people can change and grow. And even the most heinous situations, I've seen things come out of. Now, when we talk about trauma, each of us experiences trauma differently. Some child could be left on a soccer field and really feel traumatized by that. And then parents come and get them and such. But so it's different for each person. And I've learned with the type of trauma work that I do is to listen and to respect their journey. And using a skill called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, it's a way for people to move through the trauma to the point where they don't even remember how badly they experienced it. And that's the whole continuum from combat to all the way through to more what someone may judge as a mundane experience. But for that other person, they've internalized it either as severe abandonment, and it affects their lives. It affects their relationships, their jobs, what they're willing to do, how they see themselves in accomplishment. And so I think there are tools now, a lot of really good tools for people if they're seeking and need help with trauma, that they can find it. And so this book showcases some of that too. The other thing that I think is a takeaway from the book, within these experiences, one of the characters was severely traumatized, blown up in a rollover and such, and an IED in Afghanistan. And one of the techniques is guided imagery. Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not.
Okay. So guided imagery is, you do it naturally, probably, is that you can, if you close your eyes and you do that, like right now, if you do that for a moment and you just imagine where you feel the safest. For everybody, it's different. So I'm just closing my eyes now and I'm seeing, for me, it's a garden. It's lush, it's green. I hear the sound of birds. I hear a small running stream near to where I'm walking, and I can take a deep breath. Count of 4, let it out. Breathe in. Count of 4, 2, 3, 4, and let it out. And as I see this, as I feel this, the brain really is amazing in the sense of I can become quite relaxed. I can just immediately find focus and centered. And it could be, for everyone, it's different. Some people like to imagine they're at the beach or the mountains, or even for some people, they feel safest in a particular chair in their house. Like when I say that, what comes up for you?
You mean if I were to go through that meditation process?
Well, if you were to just, if you closed your eyes and
Right.
you thought of a place, you don't even have to close your eyes, but if you thought of a place that was very relaxing for you and safe, it could be something out of your past, could be something in the present, because sometimes it's a favorite chair for someone and they sit in it, or their bedroom. And some people have never felt safe, which is really interesting. But then they can create their own safe spot in their mind. So do you
Oh, I
have a
see.
place that you feel like the most relaxed?
Well, honestly, for me personally, I don't like when it comes to certain things, like I just, any kind of environment, whether it's just in my car or at the house, whatever I happen to deal with stressfully, just to kind of stop, take a few breaths, and then move on. Now as you were talking about that, and I was reflecting on it, I don't necessarily go back or try to find a place where I can say, okay, this thing will immediately give me discomfort. I don't know that I personally have never done that.
Okay.
Yeah, because for
Well,
me, it's
you know,
always
when you,
just been wherever I'm at that moment.
yeah. Well, and oftentimes what you describe, it's interesting because you talk about the car. For many people, it's being in the car, listening to
Right.
music, doing some deep breathing. It's an enclosed space. And it's, we all are in our cars quite a bit. We're very familiar and comfortable in them. So maybe that is it for you. And that's fine. But the
Yeah.
point is too, is that you just have the intention of managing your emotions and taking yourself into a relaxed state. And that's
Mhm.
really half the battle, isn't it?
Right. I see what you mean. So you mean that in your experience that most people don't, and they just kind of feel like they're out of control, and so they let those emotions or whatever just happened take more control than it should?
Well, and I don't mean it in the clinical sense of
Right.
extremes. I mean, every day, like Hans Sallier, the endocrinologist, was the first one that really talked about how our environment impinges upon us with stress, right?
Right.
He's the grandfather of stress reduction. So on any given day, we are going through our business, and it might not be traumatic or extreme, but if we stop and if we take a deep breath, we just take a moment with that intention to center ourselves, then our work is more productive. And the studies show that it's really helpful. That's, you see, these corporations like Google and such that provide those spaces for people to do it based on that research. And that's really all it is, probably you and I are both parents. And so we've had that time with our children when they're young to just calm down, take a deep breath. And now they teach that in preschools, kindergartens, and elementary school. And I'm always so impressed by that, because if we could all manage our emotions, self-control, self-regulation, everything would improve, But now kids growing up weren't taught that so much. Now they are, in terms of emotional self-management, and good things come from it, So in the situation in the book, it is more extreme, of course, because it's demonstrating that, but it's also very effective. And so there's a takeaway there. The other piece is that when Maslow talked about peak experiences and such, we can all define those in our lives. Like when I say that, someone listening to this may find themselves immediately thinking of something that they defined as a peak experience. And so in the book as well, in terms of calming and centering someone, and this is a neurolinguistic psychology tool. I did not invent this, but it's really effective. So you take your thumb and your index finger and you put them together like that. What's the easiest way? Like you're making an okay, like that. Mm-hmm. And then with those fingers, that's called anchoring. And so you put your fingers together, the finger and the thumb like that, take a deep breath, and you imagine the most satisfying experience or the peak experience, something really good. And what they call is anchoring that. So at any given moment, when you need to, you can really bring that forward by just putting those fingers together and imagining it. I've seen that work so well. And, it's interesting because Olympic athletes do things like that. The mission, they focus on it, they see it. You've probably had that experience too in your life, imagining something, bringing it to fruition.
Yeah, all the time. Sometimes I do it too much.
Well, when you say you do it too much, you mean that's a really positive thing though, isn't it?
Oh yeah, no, it's just what I meant with that is that I find that if I have a general idea and proceed with it, works out much better than me having to sit there and figure out every single detail about it before I move on.
Right.
That's what I mean with too much. Right.
Exactly. So you say that very well. And it's true that sports psychologists, especially for Olympic athletes, walk them through in their mind. Of course, they prepare very well, but also to see that as successful. In the military, they do that too. In mission oriented, see the mission, walk it through in your mind and imagine in it. And so that's very powerful. And we can do that in our lives as well. So introducing just those positive ways of living in the world in the book amid these exciting, situations that you come through. That's the page turner part, where there's someone accused of something and they move through it. There are different scenarios. I don't want to give it away, and when you least expect it, there's a complete turn. And so it's something that wasn't expected, and then there's some sad parts too. I want to give the heads up there because people do die in this book. So.
Right. I mean, when it comes to stories, I mean, it's almost kind of to be expected as part of the story.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad you feel
unless it is a romance novel,
Right.
But
or Winnie the Pooh, something like
right.
that.
But I'm glad that in a way, I don't know that a lot of people look at it in this way, but in a way, I'm glad that it is fictional, because I know whenever I read something or if I'm watching a show, sometimes we can get our emotions all riled up in it, and we then get our own thoughts on what's going on, how we would judge the situation, what we would do in that situation. But the best part about it is that when the movie's off, when that show is off, when the book is closed, you just say, okay, I went through this roller coaster. It's been up and down. I'm all emotionally riled up, but now I can just relax and reflect on it on a more relaxed state as opposed to being wound up in it, and so it acts like a, therapeutic just by that default.
Yes. No, you say that very well. I have had people contact me that did cry. And we talk about, though, at the end of the book for the protagonist, the spiritual awakening that she has, if you will, the decision she makes. It's a very positive ending. But
Right.
there is tragedy, of course. And like you say, we do. That's one of the great things about stories is that they touch us and they really speak to us. And I've had a few people call the SallyWolfOnline.com site is where I get most of all of the people that reach out to me doing that, and to understand how they've had situations come up in their lives. And especially because we still don't talk about intimate partner violence in the sense of it's in the news, definitely, but in terms of a family experiencing that and being able to, the catharsis through the book has been pretty powerful for individuals.
Well, Sally, thank you for that. I think you give a pretty good description without having to give up too much of the storyline. Otherwise, what's the point of having to read it? Right. And so, just I guess in conclusion, if there's something else you would like to finish off before we finish up here.
Well, I sure appreciate your time. It's been such a pleasure talking with you. And the Ozark Mountain Press, I appreciate them too. The editor I worked with on this book was phenomenal. And just everybody there has been so great to work with. So I appreciate it and look forward to keeping in touch perhaps. And maybe we'll do this again sometime.
Definitely. I would certainly hope so. Well, and of course, I'm going to have all your links and whichever ways are possible for people to contact you in the description below. So we don't have to worry about that in case somebody, feels so inclined of wanting to contact you and reach out for whatever reason.
Well, I'm so glad you said that, because let me just say this too, though. If you have a significant issue, don't reach out to me. You need to go to an emergency room, call a hotline. These are not monitored in the professional sense. And so I'm so glad you said that, is that happy to hear about stories and being touched. But if you really need help, you need to call the proper hotline, 911, those situations right away. Does that make sense?
It does. Well, I'm glad I was able to remind you of something.
Yes, thank you.
Especially the regrets after something is over. It's like, I should have said that.
Oh, yeah. Well,
yeah.
No. I just always want to make sure that everyone gets the help they need in a timely way, because you know how that is. When people need help and reach out, I want to make sure, because it comes up for me in my profession. Some people don't return their calls or this and that. And if they need help, they need to get assistance right away.
All right. Well, thanks for mentioning that. Well, Sally, thanks again. Like I said, and you mentioned, I hope we do this again. And, you take care, and until next time.
Well, take care as well. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.